All right. So today we are talking about understanding the story your data tells. That's a pretty broad topic, like I said, so we're going to be talking primarily about qualitative and quantitative data-driven decision-making and a little bit about data-driven storytelling. So to define two terms that you'll hear a lot today, I wanted to just quickly go over the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative data is the kind of data that I think most people think about when you hear the word data. These are things that can be written and measured with numbers. They can be analyzed in a spreadsheet, and they can be plugged into equations. You can calculate the average of them, all the things like that. So this could be things like the number of participants in your programs, attendance rates, email open rates, age, time, anything to do with money can be measured in a quantitative way. Qualitative is maybe the data that you collect more often at your nonprofit, but maybe you don't think of it as data. So these are information about qualities, and they can be a little bit trickier to measure. These are things like student attitude, gender, meeting notes, socioeconomic status is notoriously hard to measure. So things that sort of fall into this category are a little bit more difficult to measure, but we're going to talk about both today. All right, I'm going to share just a couple tips from GlobalGiving's data scientist, Nick Hamlin, on how to ask the right kind of questions and know that you're collecting the right kind of data. This is one of my favorite quotes, and it's one that Nick included in the article that he wrote about this topic. It's a quote that was maybe said by Albert Einstein, maybe not. Folks don't really agree, but it says, if I had 1 hour to solve the problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. I think this is really important because I think a lot of us at nonprofits can sometimes be quick to jump to conclusions and decide on solutions without fully understanding the problem. And if you don't really understand the problem or the question that you're trying to answer, then the solution that you're coming up with might not be the right solution. So I encourage everyone to keep this in the back of your mind throughout this call and throughout your work. I find it really useful in my work. So hopefully that should help lay some framework for the rest of the call. All right, so after I go over these tips, I will share the full article that Nick wrote going into detail about these 4 tips, but I wanted to just do a quick overview with 4 tips that he has for asking really good questions about data. His first recommendation is to ask what's missing. So his example for this was a man named E.D. Morel, who is probably not someone you all have heard of. But he was a clerk at Britain's Elder Dempster Shipping Company in the 1890s. He was maintaining the books for the British company's shipments to Central Africa. And you might not know who E.D. Morel is, but you probably know what was happening in Central Africa in the 1890s. So he was keeping the books for this company and noticed something kind of strange. There were tons of ivory and rubber coming from the Congo to Europe, but the only things Europe was sending back were guns and ammunition. So he kept digging into this, and he was one of the people that discovered the system of forced labor in the Belgian Congo that turned out to be one of history's most notorious humanitarian crises. So these sort of negative questions that you can learn more about by, noticing what's not there or what should be there can be a really powerful way to sort of think about data and asking questions at your nonprofit. The second is to embrace your ignorance. And Nick included a quote from Richard Feynman, who's a pretty famous physicist, who basically said, if you're doing an experiment or you're testing something, you should report everything that you think might make it invalid. Not only what you think is right about it, but other causes that could explain your results or things that you've thought of that you've eliminated by some other experiment and how they worked. So this is important in avoiding confirmation bias and to make sure that you're not just looking for the answers that you expect to be there and knowing that you're not going to have all the answers. Next, third recommendation is to practice asking questions. This one seems pretty obvious, but I thought it was good to include. Anyway, Nick referenced Leonardo da Vinci's infamous to-do lists, and how he would just write dozens of questions that he had about the world. So to practice doing this about your programs or organization, try setting a timer for 10 minutes and writing down as many questions as you can think of related to that topic. It's better to ask a lot of mediocre questions than try to ask one single perfect question. His last tip is to use an existing tool. So don't try to reinvent the wheel for data analysis and brainstorming. There are a lot of free or very cheap tools you can use online. I'll share a link to something called the Fast Idea Generator in the chat in just a minute. So yeah, definitely do some research and see what kind of tools are available for you before thinking you might get overwhelmed by trying to analyze all this data yourself. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first nonprofit peer speaker, Steve. So Steve has worked in college admissions since 2000, and he recently co-founded Accept, which is a new nonprofit seeking to foster anti-racist and socially just policies in school culture and the university admissions process here in the United States. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you. Just let me know when you want me to click through the slides.
Sure. Yeah, great. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning from my perspective from Atlanta, Georgia, and thank you, Mirinda and GlobalGiving, for the opportunity. I acknowledge that there may be a lot of terms from the type of work that I do that are very American regarding the education system here and the work that we do. So happy to anything that needs clarification. Happy to shed light on that. But I am a counselor, academic advisor at a high school in Atlanta, and Accept is a group. If you could forward to the next slide, Mirinda, that our two friends and I co-founded, and we are a Facebook-based group, and this is just an image from the main founder who lives in New Orleans, Louisiana. She was really inspired by this artist studio that is adjacent to her home in the Bywater area of New Orleans. The artist you can see is tag in the lower right-hand corner, B. Mike, does a lot of artwork actually related to a lot of the TV shows that are being filmed in New Orleans with Colin Kaepernick and other celebrities, if you will, that are also doing social justice awareness. And Accept, you see our expanded acronym up there: Admissions Community Cultivating Equity and Peace Today. We are there's a niche in the American school system where many high schools have academic advisors who are specifically charged with providing consultation to help students apply for university admission and for scholarships, which is perhaps different or perhaps the same person as those that provide social emotional counseling. And so there's a group of us that are high school based that were really troubled by, for example, the increase in campus school shootings, the increase in mental health tolls, and the lack of attention in policy that exists regarding students that come from, let's say, low socioeconomic backgrounds that don't have access to the type of curriculum they want. What are perhaps the policies or systems that are in place that, quite frankly, are based in racism that need to be called out. And then when that work converts to the university admissions process, what are the additional barriers, especially in an American system where there's so many parts of university admissions that are subjective? what can universities do better? So we were a group of counselors that were writing directly to the admissions deans of all the top sorts of universities and saying, what are you all doing about this? If our shared goal is to improve society through education, there's parts of our system that are broken. And right now, we started as a group of just 40 counselors, thinking it would be a small discussion group. And then in 3 years' time, we've grown to over 5,300 members. Every single person is someone who works at a high school, and we have a certain contingent that's international, about 3% of our members outside the United States. But also folks that are university admissions officers. If you could go to the next slide, please. And so we are incorporating at the end of this month as a nonprofit. We didn't even know 3 years ago that this would even have the momentum that it does. And so we've been slower and intentional, given that all of us on the three core leaders of this team, we all have full-time jobs and lives of our own. And, we were not necessarily seeking to add additional work and yet another full-time job on top of what we're doing. But the particular language that we use causes some controversy, causes some tough discussions. And so being able to pause and see, are we, is our language consistent? And what are we really getting to the core of a cause, getting to the core of an issue versus, and making sure that we're really going after the issue versus folks and our professionals and peers and other colleagues feeling like they are being personally called out by one of us. We really try to try to melt away at the larger issues. The second point here is that our group also provides online support for counselors that may feel that they have an empty gas tank themselves. This work is tough in general, let alone if you were from a personal background that may or may not feel supported or included at the educational institution that you work, whether it's high school or university. When you may be the only one, let's say, of an African-American background in a high school, and all the students of that background come to you, you may not get credit from your supervisor for that additional work that extends beyond the typical job description. So how does one recharge their battery when there's a lot, when they their work may or may not be seen or appreciated, and work that is already very emotionally involved. You can go to the next slide, please. And the irony, we didn't study numbers, the three of us on the core leadership team. I'll even say too, the three of us didn't study counseling either, and here we are. Last year, we were just so, we're still stunned. We were awarded from a ballot of our peers to receive our National Association's Excellence in Education Award. Michelle Obama won this award in 2015, and so for three of us that were just leading a Facebook group, but most of us from humanities backgrounds. And so, we are not necessarily naturally equipped. We use data in certain ways in our lives, but it's not the natural thing that we turn to. So how do we know that we are able to that we're asking the right questions, that we are reflecting on the right types of data in order to help our group grow. And for myself, I'm from a Taiwanese American background. My mom grew up in Taiwan. My parents didn't go to college. Marie's Vietnamese American, Brandy, African American, but raised by her grandmother. Her mom and dad were not part of her life growing up. So all of us, each with our own why on why we're so interested in education, but how do we convert that into peer support across our profession? If you could go to the next slide, please. And on the right-hand side, one thing that we learned earlier on is that something as simple as a wristband is something that it's kind of an artifact that can help take this online discussion group and bring it live and in person. And I'll talk more about the wristbands in a minute, but these are, being Facebook-based has helped us, and we've been Facebook-based from the beginning, because if you run a Facebook group, these are all the things that Facebook will help to curate for the group members, and some things that we've learned. We're 70% female. Our members are most likely to read an article that we post on a Friday afternoon. Who knew? In terms of the folks are more likely to join our group on a Tuesday. Just those sorts of things that, in terms of when to post an article or a discussion, it'll even share, who are our most active members, who's engaged, which posts created the most activity, and some of them are the most. We think there's ones that maybe. We are proven wrong all the time. There was one post that was just a very benign sort of question. And it was, when was the first time that you had a non-white teacher in school? And it received over 200 posts. It was just the simplest question. And then folks saying it wasn't until grad school that they had their first non-white teacher, for example. And folks sharing that and really thinking about that when, is our profession representative of our neighborhoods and our communities, for example. We're also able to dispatch and create different subgroups. So there's a separate group for Atlanta-based counselors that are part of Accept. Of the 5,300 members, there's 170 in this metropolitan area. We've realized that there's 10 counselors in Singapore, and they may not know each other. Is there a chance for us to be able to get them together? And for those that are not a member of the counseling community, there's still a public page that doesn't require membership, where folks can still read our articles, and we can track engagement there. Next slide, please. And so what we, and to tie this into one of the questions, how do we know we're on the right track? And we talk as a leadership team regarding, there's kind of three core elements that we try to sustain. And that is growing and sustaining our membership, that feeling of, even though we're all based in an institution, we can be in this online network and really feel that we're part of something. The wristbands have been one of the most fascinating parts of our growth and and what we do, because and I'm just tagging one of the lines here, one of those, let's say Black Lives Matter, or we have another one that says decolonize your mind. And it sparks conversation. It can spark criticism. It can certainly invite criticism and folks that have feelings about these sorts of statements, but often from adults. The students that we serve are highly curious and feel, a lot of them feel a sense of safety, especially if it's, let's say, a Caucasian white counselor working with underrepresented students. There's something about a signal saying, inviting a student to share their background as they talk about their goals and their future. It was something that has really helped bridge perhaps that gap that maybe felt between a power differential, if you will, that is melted down between an adult counselor and a vulnerable student. And it also can melt down some of the power differentials between peers too. Meetups are what we call those moments where at a professional conference, we will get together and then folks that have been active in the group see each other face to face for the first time, and then are really able to talk about a lot of the issues that counselors are facing face to face. And after a certain quantity of these meetups, we were getting more feedback from folks saying, y'all should be a nonprofit. Y'all should do this. And we were deflecting that. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Some of the things that ended up happening, we got a signal from Facebook, and we were invited to the first ever Facebook Community Summit, where Facebook named us one of the 150 most engaged groups on Facebook. And we had no idea. You know, we were just kind of a controversial group of counselors. And then if you could advance, please, Mirinda. I'll continue. What we were able to do is really take that sort of signal from our professional organization, and then think about, okay, how do we scale this? But then we weren't really, production of wristbands and mailing them was all the overhead that we had. So how do we then think about how do we generate even more income? How do we risk that and take it to the next slide here? And so when we think about those, thank you, Amita, for that. And so when we were thinking about, okay, if these are our three core things, our members and these wristband artifacts and meetups, what are operating costs? And Facebook remains free, but we've also added a web domain and a CRM system for additional member engagement. We were self-funding for the first 3 years, but we're now, as we incorporate as a nonprofit, we'll be able to collect donations, and we're seeking advice on really the operation for a 501c3. And then for meetups, what we do is we ask our professional organizations to donate the conference room space and give us a non-competing time at our professional conferences, which are every professional organization that we've linked up with has gladly helped us out with. And then we're trying to get more metropolitan areas to organize their own local meetup, where we provide articles for discussion and try to really think about action items that are important to that particular region, because not every region necessarily has the same issues on their mind in terms of counselors. There could, for example, be different funding issues for different regions, and other things that are. And we are using Nation Builder, and that's one of the main coordinators in New Orleans, Marin, did some research, and Nation Builder was the one that seemed the smoothest and the most intuitive. And so I'm happy to share. We're at the very beginning of that, but happy to share some of that further. Next slide, Mirinda, please. And so when we were thinking about staying or growing, carving out the time for feedback, and in particular from folks that are not part of the counseling community, was something that was advice that we received. It's easy for one's friends to, and friends who are colleagues to say, oh yeah, this is great, keep going. It's another thing to test it out with folks that are in different industries. And so we were talking with folks of different age groups and different backgrounds, and talking with someone who works in film, talking with someone who is in corporate law, And what's happened is that some of these folks are some of our biggest champions, if you will, who are non-industry folks. And that gave us a signal that perhaps these could be the first candidates for our board. In order to be a nonprofit, there needs to be a board of trustees or a board of directors. And so, we're trying to align and finding value in feedback from those that come from a different professional realm. It helps us, that variety of perspective, is giving us a lot of momentum at the moment, helping us determine if we're scalable, is this really sustainable? And what we're trying to do is convert this into a potential where we may be able to provide professional development experiences for school-based groups, and perhaps even in, let's say, lunch and learn sessions where corporate offices might want us to come in from our contrasting perspective to talk about socially just and anti-racist lenses in thinking about organizations and student development, and even adult development. We're keeping skeptical about existing organizations that may want to, that are larger and might have more capital, but part of the problem that we're in our industry could be already linked to some of these existing machines, if you will. And so while we have friends and allies in many of our larger organizations, we are still doing the slower and a more skeptical route where we're not partnering with everyone that may want to partner with us, at least not at the moment, and trying to be gracious with that. And we have strong enough signals to where just earlier this month, the main coordinator in New Orleans, Marin, left her full-time job. So she walked away from the school that she worked at, and she's worked in universities and high schools for 23 years. And she's now going to devote her full-time efforts toward growing this nonprofit. And so we're all in this moment trying to think about how to support her. And we have the signals for that. Next slide, please, Mirinda. And so my encouragement, again, just humbly sharing, how does this convert to data is thinking about, we think about it in terms of the time, the work, and the money. And of the three main leaders, being realistic and gracious with one another about hours per week. And before, all of us were in time-intensive jobs, working in schools, sometimes 70 hours a week, working in schools. And so our best effort may need to be tabled, and then I just put a whole smattering of what the work means to us on top of our personal life and our full-time job. There's a lot of, think of an eventual pie chart, what works per person, and then perhaps holding each other accountable a little bit more. There's always more to research. There's always, we needed a logo, for example, so how much will that cost? How much will that, and then what we found is that we had a graphic designer also in our membership who volunteered on her own that she would design our brand book for free. Harnessing those relationships, engagement can turn into volunteers from within, even though that we were certainly willing to seek out, and put those funds in. The work of, at least for us, because in a highly emotional and charged group, the amount of time that we are spending thanking and apologizing, there's a lot of folks that as you grow, and with a hot button sort of set of topics, being willing to call someone and keep them engaged if they misunderstood something, or perhaps we didn't give them enough of something that they needed, whether it was time or those nuances. I put grant writing in brackets because we are at the beginning of writing grants. And so I'm so excited about GlobalGiving's next seminar on grants. And I'm definitely going to be a listener on that one. But there are, that's where we're trying to draw that line as we go to the money. We've done a little bit of out-of-pocket expenses as leaders, but we're really now trying to convert this into grant writing, and then perhaps consultation fees from facilitating programs, in addition to member donations. You know, as we will go live as a nonprofit in the next month or so, and thinking about, okay, those are going to be the three legs of our tripod, if you will, that will hopefully fuel, you know, further growth. And the goal eventually is to have, you know, how aspirational this is, but, you know, right now it's going to be, you know, one full-time employee, but that person who just left her job, you know, wants to have, you know, 3 to 8 full-time employees potentially. And so we're going to see where the grant money may go. And all of this to try to heal a broken process, and really take that intersection of school policies and the desire for education, and try to make it as equitable as possible. So, and not sure, Mirinda, if should do some Q&A now or go to the next speaker. Yeah, but happy to take any initial questions.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. That was really interesting, and I think it, you know, hearing sort of the arc of the story of how Accept was created, and then how you're powering forward, and how you know, the data that you collect is really helping move all of that forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
We do not have any questions in the Q&A box just yet, so we will pause on questions for now. And if any of you have any questions for Steve, please do pop those in the Q&A box, and we will get to them by the end of the session. All right. All right, so something that a lot of you mentioned in the registration form was that you want to know how other nonprofits are measuring success. So some of you may use KPIs, which are key performance indicators, so certain things that you measure to determine success at one of your programs. So if we want to just take a couple minutes and share in the chat box which KPIs or other indicators you use to measure success in one of your programs, I think that could be super helpful for people who are looking for a little bit of inspiration there. So I'll read out a few as they come in. Okay, Annette said they measure student scores in schools. That one I imagine is pretty popular and common across nonprofits working in the educational space. John said the number of students reached by the programs and student attendance. So that's so that could be two different numbers, right? The total number of students that are enrolled in your programs, and then the rate of attendance. So how many students actually show up to school or the programs every day. And figuring out how you can improve that attendance rate is means that could be an important data point for you. Okay, Corinne says, okay, and they work with tigers in India. So the total number of wild tigers in population compared to the baseline figure, the number of months since the last poaching or poisoning incident. Basumati measures the same as John, so the number of students and student attendance rates. Corinne says they also measured things like how many tigers are using their water holes. Amita looks for improvements in our English level test. All right, Sharon, working in Kenya, measures student grades, number of students enrolled in the library card program, the number of students receiving our reusable sanitary pad kits, the number of students receiving deworming meds, and we look at improvement of health when dewormed. Sharon, do you mind elaborating how you can measure improvement of health? I think that falls under the sort of one of the qualitative things we talked about earlier that's a little bit harder to measure. How do you measure the difference between someone being ill and being well in your situation? All right, Adriana says the number of students who complete our programs and the number of students who graduate from high school, continue to work, or go to college. Great. Okay, Basumati has an interesting point. For us, it's important that the skills that we teach are now mentioned as must-have in the medical students' skill sets. So making sure that your programs remain really relevant to the sector as a whole is important. Philippe says the passing rate between one school year and the next. Great. Okay, so Sharon says regarding measuring measuring a student's health after receiving the deworming kits. So this is a great example of measuring qualitative data. So she says when we do professional development teacher workshops, we do pre-questionnaires and post-questionnaires after the workshops, and we do observations. So that's a great collection of qualitative data. And we look for signs of worms like ringworm and other outward signs that you can see. Okay, Philippe also looks at things like decreasing the number of teen pregnancies and increasing the number of young people knowing their HIV status. Very important. All right, if you have other KPIs that you would like to share with the group, please do continue to put those in the chat. We are going to move forward with Retno's presentation. We've worked really hard to make sure her microphone works, so I hope we can get this to work for the next few minutes. All right, so Retno is the General Manager of Access Project in Jakarta, Indonesia. Access Project has been a GlobalGiving partner for a very long time. And they focus on working with the trash picker community in Jakarta, as well as the welfare of the families and the education of their children. So it's really holistic programs, and we're super excited to have Retno answer a couple of questions about how they use qualitative data. So this is the first question I asked Retno. When and why has Access Project made a change based on qualitative data that you collect? All right. Retno, are you able to talk?
Yes, hello.
Great, we can hear you.
I'm glad. So, should I explain?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, hi everybody. I'm Retno. So, I work with trash pickers. It is one community at one of the dump site in Jakarta. So about 6 years ago, over a long time, Access Project was only concentrate on primary kids because we want as many primary kids went to school. But eventually there's a lot of group donors or expatriate. They came visit to the community and they saw a lot of kids under 5 years old. They were just playing in the dump site and things like that. And they had the idea of just starting as a play time. teaching singing and simple things like that. At the end of the 5 years or 5.5 years old, the parents were getting ready to send their kids to the formal school, which is the grade 1. And in Indonesia, in order to be able to go to grade 1, the kids have to know how to read, write, and count. So the parents will start asking me, we love the play with the guests, but then we need the kids to have a real preparation for the school. So hearing about that, I thought, and then one day we had a complaint from moms when they send the kids to go to school on their first day. The next day, the kids didn't want to go because the teachers scolded them. And the reason why is because the kids were not ready, and there's 40 kids in one class. So that really gave me an idea of a program. I thought, well, I think that the community needs to have a preparation for the younger kids. So I set up the, and then I set up the program and I apply. Oh yeah, and then, okay, the volume went down. Okay, so I set up the room and I hire a professional teacher that knows about the Indonesian curriculum, and we start teaching the kids for 1 year in order to, okay, looks like the volume is going down. Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, so your volume went down for us too, but we fixed it by increasing the volume on our microphone. So folks,
okay.
if you're having a problem hearing Retina, go ahead and try to up the volume on your own computer.
Yeah, okay, so that's when I start creating the class for the younger kids, so that the next year they have the right age and they're ready to go to formal school, going to grade 1. And after they finish the school, well, the class is only 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesday, Fridays from 8 to 11, and that should be enough. And then the next year, when they start getting ready to go to grade 1, and we notice after 6 months that even the school said that the kids are ready. And when we started 6 years ago, we noticed that these kids who's now in grade 5, they continue to be more ready, more intellectually ready, and they're easy to handle compared to other children that did not get a chance to have pre-grade 1 class that we created. At the beginning of our program, we did not just teach the kids, but also the parents. As simple as like the teacher was asking me, right now, can you ask the parents to brush their kids before they go to school? Because when the teacher gives the reading, the kids smells, and the kids didn't go to take a bath before they go to this pre-grade 1. So we're also involving the parents and make sure that they bring healthy snack and things like that. So not just preparing the school, the curriculum, and the intellectually, but we also prepare the health checkup, making sure that they have, we have a eye checkup, ears, throat, and nose, because we have a lot of kids with broken eardrums. We also have the dental checkup. Also, we also need to have an X-ray because a lot of kids get TB. So I think this have a health checkup contribute to the ability for the kids to continue having the better grades later on. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's a great example of, really listening to the feedback from your community and taking in that qualitative data, those conversations, and opinions from the mothers to realize, the program that you need to create to better serve these children.
Yeah. I mean, what?
Oh, yeah. So the second question I asked right now about this program was what key indicators you consider when defining if this program was a success. And she talked about the same, the pre-grade 1 class program. So right now, if you want to explain.
Yeah. So it's I think we noticed that this having a pre-grade 1 class, preparing the kids to go to the formal course. So our project, a nonprofit project, work with the trust speakers community. We don't build a school in the community, but we send the kids to go to the formal schools, which is, the public schools, so that the kids have the opportunity of going to, learning and have a same opportunity as the, fortunate kids, because we consider them as the less fortunate. So we noticed that, going to grade 1, going to grade 3, this batch continuing, they have a much better well-being attitude. And I think having a professional teacher at the grade 1 level, preparing them, not just learning how to count, we see that, and also providing health, completing their immunization. Also, we invite our college kids to be their tutor, and that also improve. We notice the grade points, the report every year, it's improving. We noticed this, years before. Experience the mother. We were just saying on my preparation that it's something to do with family planning. We noticed that the moms are now they're more busier taking care of the kids. I told them, in order for you to get help from Access Project, scholarship funds, you need to participate in every meeting of the schools. It's hard for them because they didn't have education and they're quite embarrassed to see people, but that's part of the requirement. So now the parents understand the importance of the kids going to school. So every year they always ask, can my kids still have a chance to go to school? So what that is, what I see is the successful, as more and more parents understand that if I can be part of this project, then my kids can continue to go to school, not just primary, but middle school, high school, and even college. So, from 6 years ago, we didn't have any college kids, and now this year we have 8. We have additional, and it's under the care of our Access Education program through GlobalGiving.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Retno, and it's really amazing to hear that kids from these families are able to go on to college with you.
Yes.
Awesome.
Very much.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Retno right now? I'm not seeing any in the Q&A box, so we can do one last check here at the end if you all want to think about any last minute questions you have about for Steve or Retno about how they either of them use and collect data for their organizations. Oh, Retno, Annette has a question for you. She says, what if these vulnerable families can't pay for fees like tuition, uniforms, and supplies?
Yeah, they just cannot go to school. They stop. This is particularly this is the problem with the less fortunate. They just cannot pay. Now I have to also inform this. There's a lot of kids. The reason why they don't go to school, it's not about the money. It's also because they don't have birth certificates. This is urban poverty where a lot of bad influence, sometimes it's stronger, influence the kid to not going to school. So I must say that, getting enough help financially to be able to get them paid the tuition uniform, that really does not guarantee for the kids to go to school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so if anyone else has questions for Retno, Steve, or myself, or anyone else, go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, and we'll do one last check at the end of the call. We're running a little bit behind time, so we're going to skip this and go right into our wrap-up. So there are three big takeaways that I am taking away from this call and from our speakers today. The first is that I hope everyone is able to spend plenty of time defining the problem and the questions that you're trying to answer with your work. Completing your nonprofit's theory of change and directing your questions to answer that can be really helpful. I'll drop a link to a theory of change worksheet in the chat that you all can take a look at. Because defining the right problem really helps you work toward the right solution and ask the right questions to be collecting the right kind of data. The second thing I'd like to highlight is that you're collecting a lot more data than you think you are, I think. I know a lot of nonprofit leaders are not trained data scientists. You might not have a background in analytics or statistics or anything like that. So I think the term data can be really intimidating to a lot of people. But I think about the stories that Retno shared about collecting that feedback from her community and listening to the conversations with the mothers of the kids who she created the pre-grade 1 class for. And all these sort of softer things that you can measure, and a lot of the more straightforward things that you can measure, I think are really important. So things like meeting notes, conversations, interviews, that's all qualitative data. As Amita says in the chat, it can be hard to use that unless it's typed up and shared in some form and kept organized. So that can be tricky to keep organized, but it is still data, and it is still information that you have access to and can analyze if you have the time to keep it organized. And then the last thing I'll highlight is analysis is more accessible today than ever before. There are lots of free and cheap tools available to help you analyze the data that you have already collected and to help you collect more straightforward data. You all can be the first group to know that today GlobalGiving is adding 9 new tools in GG Rewards. So keep an eye out for those later today or tomorrow, your time. And so there will be a whole new library of tools for you all to look through and hopefully help with some of this, the data analysis problem. I know Basumati says she feels like we need one paid employee who will take care of all of this. That can definitely seem like there's a lot to tackle here. But hopefully it's not too unmanageable, and with the help of some free tools. And then we'll also be relaunching GlobalGiving Time, which is a skilled volunteering platform, a little bit later this year, in a couple of months. And that is a tool where you can post volunteering challenges for corporate employees to spend a couple of hours helping your nonprofit remotely. So data analysis could be a good task for one of those people. So keep an eye out for that. Maybe in September or October is when we're thinking about that. We'll be ready to launch. So those are a couple things I wanted to highlight there. I'm going to drop the link to next month's Peer Learning Network in the chat, which is all about grant writing, which Steve mentioned in his presentation. So here's the link to that if you'd like to register. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things related to grants. So if you have experience in this and would like to share, like Stephen Retno did today, please do let us know. You can do that in the registration form and let us know what questions you have about grants that you'd like to have answered during that call on August 14th. All right, I have a quick survey that I'm hoping everyone can fill out. These surveys help us make the Peer Learning Network just a little bit better every time. So if you could answer, there are 4 questions that you can answer on a scale of 1 to 10 that should have just popped up on your screen. Excuse me. All right, and while y'all are doing that, Adriana asked, can you mention some of the free and cheap tools available to analyze data? Yes. So we're about to wrap up here, so I'm going to include links to some of those tools in the follow-up email that I'll send out on Friday. So keep an eye out for that, and I'll include some links to some of the tools that we talked about today, and I'll get some recommendations for some other tools from our data scientists here at GlobalGiving. All right, thank you so much, everyone. After you finish the poll, that is all we have for you today. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you especially to Stephen Retno for sharing your experiences on the call, and an extra special thank you for Retno for handling all of the technical difficulties we had with your sound. So I'm so glad we were able to sort that out. Yeah, so wherever you are in the world, either have a great day or a good evening.
Thank you for having me.
On the Peer Learning Network.
Thank you.